In the mid-1990s, Abia State University stood out in a very peculiar way. Just like many other higher institutions across Nigeria at that time, the campus was not entirely free from the shadows of confraternity activities. However, unlike certain schools that had gained an infamous reputation for frequent violent clashes, Abia State University in 1995 was considered a relatively calm ground. While other universities across the country were often in the news for bloody confrontations and street battles linked to student confraternities, ABSU did not carry such a dark reputation. On its campus, very few incidents had escalated into dangerous confrontations that claimed lives. In fact, many students from other institutions, especially during moments of heightened tension and crisis in their own schools, often saw Abia State University as a place of refuge, a safe zone where they could escape and cool off from the chaos raging elsewhere. For almost 2 years before December 1995, the school had somehow managed to maintain this fragile peace, despite the quiet presence of rival confraternity groups operating within its walls. It wasn't that these groups did not exist, nor that tension was completely absent. Everyone on campus knew there was always an undercurrent of rivalry and silent competition for influence. Yet, compared to other institutions where these rivalries exploded violently, ABSU remained unusually calm. Several explanations were often given for this remarkable stability. Some said the school had one of the strongest security frameworks in the region, a system that was actively backed by the state government itself. This security structure had no tolerance for troublemakers. In the previous year alone, several well-known student leaders who were suspected of leading disruptive activities had been expelled, sending a strong warning to others. But security was only one side of the story. Another reason often cited was the way the leaders of different confraternity groups at ABSU carried themselves during that period. Unlike in other schools where younger members frequently acted recklessly, sparking uncontrollable crises, the older leaders at Abia State University had a more restrained approach. They understood that unchecked violence could bring the full weight of the authorities upon them and destabilize the campus entirely. For this reason, they worked quietly behind the scenes, reaching mutual understandings with one another. These leaders often ensured that the younger members under their wings were kept in line. Whenever tensions began to rise, they stepped in to calm things down before matters escalated. This behind-the-scenes coordination contributed greatly to the relative peace the university enjoyed, making it an unusual case study in a period when campus unrest was spreading like wildfire across Nigeria's higher institutions. Thus, while danger lurked in the shadows and rivalry simmered beneath the surface, Abia State University in 1995 was, for the most part, a sanctuary, a place where peace held, even when chaos seemed to rule elsewhere. Even in the midst of the relative calm that Abia State University enjoyed in 1995, there was always an underlying tension brewing just beneath the surface. The peace on campus was fragile, and those who paid attention to the movement of student groups could sense that things might not remain quiet forever. At the heart of this quiet rivalry were two of the most feared and dominant confraternities on campus at that time, the Supreme Vikings Confraternity and the Black Axe Confraternity. Both groups had been steadily growing their presence among the student body. They were quietly recruiting new members, building influence in different corners of the campus, and strengthening their ranks. To the average student, these activities were not always visible, but within the circles of those who understood campus life deeply, it was clear that these organizations were preparing themselves for an eventual confrontation. They saw it as something that could not be avoided, a battle that was destined to happen sooner or later. For months, an uneasy truce existed between the two confraternities. They stayed out of each other's way in public, but beneath the surface, grudges were piling up. Both sides were making preparations, watching each other closely, and waiting for the spark that would light the fire. That spark eventually came on a Tuesday night, the 5th of December 1995, a night that would go down in the history of the university. The venue was the University Auditorium, a massive hall that usually served as the center for entertainment and student gatherings. On that particular night, a lively concert had been organized to give students a chance to relax, enjoy music, and socialize. The event drew in a large crowd, fun-loving young men and women who were eager to forget the pressures of academic life, at least for a few hours. The atmosphere was electric, filled with music, laughter, and the kind of carefree excitement that comes with youth. But unknown to many of those who had gathered, the seeds of chaos had already been sown even before the event began. The mistake that set everything in motion was in the choice of security for the concert. The organizers, wanting to maintain order and ensure that things didn't get out of hand, had decided to employ bouncers to control the crowd. On the surface, it seemed like a wise decision. However, what they probably didn't realize, or perhaps did not think through carefully, was that most of the bouncers they hired were members of the Supreme Vikings Confraternity. This choice would prove to be a costly one. Whether the organizers were aware of the confraternity affiliations of these young men or whether it was just a coincidence remains uncertain to this day. Some believe it was pure oversight, while others whisper that the decision was influenced by hidden hands. Whatever the case may have been, it was a decision that set the stage for disaster. With the bouncers being members of the Vikings, the Black Axe members in attendance saw the situation as an insult, almost as if the event had been taken over by their rivals. What was supposed to be a night of fun and music quickly began to transform into a tense atmosphere where egos clashed and suspicions grew. Students who had simply come to dance and enjoy the evening remained unaware that a storm was quietly gathering in their midst, a storm that would break loose before the night was over. And so, what began as a joyful student concert on that Tuesday evening would eventually become the breaking point, the moment when the fragile peace on campus finally shattered, and the rivalry between the Supreme Vikings and the Black Axe Confraternities could no longer be contained. Unknown to many students who filled the auditorium that evening, a dangerous twist was already unfolding outside at the entrance. Among those who had come for the concert were a group of young men who were not students of Abia State University. They were members of the Black Axe Confraternity from another institution, and their arrival at ABSU that night would prove to be the matchstick that lit the fire. Because they were strangers to the campus, their faces were unfamiliar to the student bouncers who had been stationed at the gate. These bouncers, who also happened to be affiliated with the Supreme Vikings Confraternity, had been tasked with keeping the event safe. Following their duty, they stopped the external visitors at the gate for a routine search. From the perspective of the Vikings who controlled the entrance, their actions were nothing unusual. Concert security worldwide often required checking guests for dangerous items before entry, and in this case, the organizers had given strict instructions to ensure no one entered the hall with anything suspicious. But to the Black Axe visitors, being searched by rivals was an insult. Tension immediately sparked as they flatly refused to be searched. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and a small crowd began to gather around the gate, sensing that something was wrong. After a heated back and forth that lasted a few tense minutes, the external Black Axe members eventually gave in and agreed to be searched. What happened next turned the atmosphere from tense to explosive. The bouncers discovered that the visitors had come carrying dangerous items that were not meant for a simple concert night. The Viking bouncers, bound by their duty and perhaps emboldened by the rivalry, made it clear that the visitors would not be allowed into the auditorium with those items. This decision did not sit well with the Black Axe visitors. They saw it as a direct challenge, a humiliation in front of onlookers. Instead of backing down, they attempted to force their way through the gate, determined to enter at all costs. The bouncers stood their ground, blocking them, and within moments the standoff turned physical. What began as a verbal confrontation quickly spiraled into a scuffle. Punches were thrown, bodies clashed, and chaos erupted at the entrance. Students inside the auditorium who heard the noise rushed toward the doors, only to be met by a wave of panic. Rumors spread like wildfire. People shouted that a violent fight had broken out, and in the confusion, fear overtook the crowd. Inside the hall, the once lively concert atmosphere turned into disorder. Chairs were knocked over, drinks spilled, and people screamed as they tried to push their way out of the auditorium. The sudden rush created a stampede, with terrified students scrambling to escape. Some lost their shoes in the rush, others stumbled and fell, but the overriding instinct was to run, to get as far away from the commotion as possible. Within minutes, the concert was over, not with the sound of music, but with chaos and fear. What had been planned as a night of entertainment ended abruptly in confusion. For many students who were present that evening, it was their first real glimpse of the dangerous tension that had been quietly building on their campus. That Tuesday night became the turning point, the moment the fragile peace at Abia State University was finally broken. The clash at the auditorium gate marked the beginning of a long and bitter feud, the very genesis of the violent chapter that was about to unfold on campus. That night after the chaos at the auditorium, fear swept through the entire Abia State University campus like wildfire. Word spread quickly that members of the Supreme Vikings confraternity were moving in groups across the campus, searching for their rivals in retaliation for what had happened earlier in the evening. Students who had nothing to do with the crisis felt the tension deeply. Many locked themselves indoors, whispering in hushed tones about what they suspected was coming. The once lively campus had suddenly become quiet, with an air of danger hanging heavily in the atmosphere. Behind the scenes, some of the older and more experienced members of both confraternities were already trying to calm things down. They understood how easily situations like this could spiral out of control and lead to tragedy. Meetings were suggested, messengers were sent, and talks of peace began quietly in small corners. But even as these attempts were being made, not everyone was willing to listen. Among those who refused to back down was a fiery young man known simply as Dan. He was a well-known figure both on and off campus, not just because of his confraternity ties, but also because of his flashy lifestyle. Dan was in his second year, studying public administration, and he was already one of the most recognizable students in the school. His father was one of the wealthiest merchants in Abia at the time, and Dan grew up with a silver spoon. He was known for driving a car as far back as his junior secondary school days, something that made him stand out in the eyes of his peers. Dan loved the good things of life, but he also had a reputation for being daring and impulsive. He was the kind of young man who was quick to take risks, often acting first before thinking things through. His entry into the Black Axe confraternity had not been entirely his own decision. Most of his close friends were already members, and through peer pressure and the desire to belong, he eventually followed their path. After the concert fracas, Dan took it personally. He was determined that the Vikings would pay, and he openly vowed retaliation. While older members were preaching peace, Dan was rallying his peers for war. His anger and determination soon drew others to his side. By Friday, the 8th of December 1995, just 3 days after the incident at the auditorium, Dan put his plan into action. He led a team of Black Axe members, some from ABSU and some from outside, on a mission to nearby Okigwe town in Imo State, which was not far from Abia State University. Their target was a student named Lola, a third-year public administration student who was said to be an active member of the Supreme Vikings confraternity. The group stormed Okigwe with the intention of catching Lola off guard, but fortune was on his side. Lola was not at home when they arrived. Frustrated but unwilling to turn back empty-handed, Dan and his men decided to move towards a popular spot in town where Vikings members were known to gather. As they approached, the Vikings at the location immediately recognized trouble. Both groups were armed, and before long, gunfire rang out. The sound shattered the night, sending residents of the area running for cover. What had started as a planned retaliation quickly exploded into an open shootout between the two rival confraternities. But then came the most tragic twist of all. Unbeknownst to both groups, a convoy of policemen was passing by at that very moment. These officers were providing security escort for a Coca-Cola distributor who was transporting money to a bank. From their point of view, what they stumbled upon looked like an armed robbery in progress. Seeing young men exchanging heavy fire, the policemen assumed they were criminals attempting to attack the money convoy. Without hesitation, the officers opened fire with superior weaponry. The confraternity members, caught off guard, panicked. Many fled in different directions, trying desperately to escape. The confrontation between Vikings and Black Axe dissolved instantly as both sides turned their focus to survival. In the midst of the chaos, Dan was struck by police bullets. Despite his reputation for fearlessness and his determination to lead the charge, his young life ended tragically that night. He was only 20 years old. Several others were also arrested in the confusion. Among those arrested was Zuma, a final-year accountancy student and a known Viking member. The rest were mostly Black Axe members from outside institutions who had followed Dan on the mission. By the following morning, the story had already spread beyond the campus. Local television stations reported that some students of Abia State University had been apprehended while allegedly attempting to rob a money convoy. The news shocked many who had no idea what truly happened the night before. The narrative in the public eye painted them as armed robbers, and that label stuck. In those days, laws were very harsh on anyone found with illegal weapons. Rumors circulated that some of those arrested never made it back home, that they were executed in line with the punishment for carrying arms illegally. For Dan, the wealthy merchant's son who had everything going for him, his story ended before it could truly begin. From a life of luxury and privilege, his choices dragged him into a war that cost him his future. His death became a cautionary tale for the entire campus community. Abia State University was never the same after that December. The incident stood as a painful reminder that confraternity life brought nothing but destruction, wasted dreams, and shattered families. The story of Dan's rise and fall serves as a warning: no matter how glamorous it may appear on the surface, the path of cultism only leads to sorrow. For this reason, students and young people everywhere must learn to say no to confraternities, no to cultism, and no to crime of any kind. Life has far more to offer outside such dangerous choices.